The Mariana Trench holds more than just pressure. It holds secrets. And now we have the last transmission from a deep-sea submersible, a recording so disturbing it was almost erased. Prepare yourself, because we're about to piece together the terrifying truth of an unknown breach that ended their mission and their lives forever. There are recordings you watch for answers, and recordings you watch because something in you wants to be proven wrong about the world. The file we recovered from the deep-sea elevator was the second kind. The kind that makes you turn the volume down before you've even heard anything, like quieting it could soften what it contains. The deep-sea elevator wasn't a ship in the way people imagine ships. It didn't cut through waves like a knife or flashlights in crowded ports. It existed to do one thing: go down where nothing human should be able to go and come back with measurements, samples, and proof. Its designers called it an elevator because it traveled along a tethered descent line, an impossibly strong composite cable that ran from a surface support vessel down into the dark, where a pressurized capsule could glide like a bead on wire. Controlled descent. Control the set. A moving room with a window you were never meant to look through. It was revolutionary in the way revolutions always are: sleek renderings, polished interviews, promises that the abyss was finally within reach. The first missions brought back clean data: thermal gradients, chemical traces, currents that didn't behave like currents should. Then, a few dives in, the elevator began to bring up stranger things. Sensor drift that didn't match known interference. Pressure readings that trembled in patterns too regular to be dismissed as noise. A low-frequency hum that didn't correspond to seismic activity or machinery. Those anomalies were filed, debated, contained by committees in cautious language. And then came the last descent. The final routine check-in was ordinary enough that it could have been scripted. Calm voices, readbacks, a small laugh when someone mispronounced the calibration code. The kind of human imperfection that makes you trust a mission because it sounds real. Surface: this is elevator capsule 7. Descent stable. Tether tension within margin. Copy capsule 7. Maintain schedule. Next check-in on the quarter hour. Roger. See you on the quarter. That was it. A door closing in the dark. When the quarter hour came, the surface sent the prompt. No reply. At first, nobody panicked. The trench likes to swallow radio the way a forest swallows light. Dropouts happen. A minute becomes 2. 2 becomes 5. The support vessel's crew reran checks, re-aimed arrays, increased power. They tried redundancy channels and backup frequencies. They attempted the simplest, most humiliating fix in the world: turn it off and turn it on again, cycling the signal modems, resetting the uplink. The only thing that came back was a thin, stubborn hiss. If you've never listened to deep-sea static, you might imagine it as ordinary white noise. It isn't. It has texture. It sounds wet. It sounds like distance. It sounds like something breathing behind a wall. By the end of the first hour, the mission director, Dr. Asha Marek, stopped pretending it was a comms issue. She ordered an emergency ascent sequence, an automatic fail-safe that should have pulled the capsule upward along the tether like a bead rolling home. Nothing moved. When they checked tether tension, the readout didn't show slack the way it would if the capsule had broken free. It showed strain. Heavy strain, as if something far below had hooked the line and was leaning its whole weight against it. That was when the language changed. Not loss of contact. Not temporary comms disruption. They started saying incident. Search operations in the abyss aren't like search operations anywhere else. You can't hover a helicopter and scan. You can't send divers. You can't even send a camera without bargaining with the darkness. The support vessel was joined by others: national oceanographic ships, private salvage platforms, research fleets that spoke different languages but understood the same dread. The ocean above the trench became a staging ground. Gray decks, salt wet steel, people talking softly as if the water could hear them. It took days to locate the elevator, and they didn't find it by sight. They found it by a stain in the data, a distortion in sonar returns that refused to match the seafloor, a shape that shouldn't have been there, as if a piece of infrastructure had been bent out of its intended geometry. When the first salvage drone finally reached the site, its lights revealed a nightmare in slow motion. The elevator capsule hadn't simply failed. It looked mauled. Panels peeled outward. Reinforced seams spread open like lips forced apart. The tether line was still attached, but it didn't hang cleanly. It twisted in a corkscrew as if it had been spun hard enough to remember it. And yet the data core, sealed in a hardened vault designed to survive pressures and impacts, was still in place. That was the miracle, or the bait, depending on how you think the world works. The extraction was delicate in the way bomb disposal is delicate. Not because the object might explode, but because one wrong motion could erase the only witness left. The salvage team, led by Commander Ren Yamada, used articulated drone arms to cut through buckled plating millimeter by millimeter. A current surged once, sudden and inexplicable, and the drone camera jerked as if something had bumped it from the side. The operator swore and corrected. The feet steadied. For a moment, in the corner of the frame, the drone's light caught a surface that didn't look like torn metal or rock. It looked smooth, too smooth, like a wall. Then the camera swung away, and when it returned, the angle was different, the corner gone. They brought the core up as if carrying a sleeping disease. On deck, it was smaller than anyone expected. A squat cylinder, dark and scuffed, with pitted edges where the casing had taken a hit. It ticked softly as it warmed in the air. It smelled faintly of brine, even through its seals, as if the ocean had found a way into it just by wanting to. Dr. Marek insisted on a clean lab environment. The core was moved into a shielded container and flown to a processing facility that didn't exist on public maps. That's where we came in. Signal reconstruction, archival recovery, forensic audio, machine learning interpolation. The job sounded clinical. It wasn't. The first time we mounted the core and tried to pull the log, the system returned a directory full of nonsense. File names corrupted into symbols. Time stamps broken into overlapping fragments, as if the clock had been shaken until it forgot how to count. Most of the video streams were unreadable. Most of the audio tracks were a smear of static that spiked and dipped without pattern. If you had handed it to someone without context, they would have called it junk. The only reason we didn't was the repeating signature in the noise, something that wasn't random, a pulse, a regularity, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living thing. Our reconstruction engineer, Maya Kwan, wrote a filter to strip out known mechanical frequencies, thruster whine, pump vibration, internal fans. Then we removed the tether telemetry carriers. Then we isolated the power bus chatter. The static thinned reluctantly like fog peeling back from a road. Underneath, something remained. At first it was just a throb, low enough that you felt it more than heard it. Then it rose into the audible range as we boosted gain, an irregular knocking that came in clusters. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a longer pause, then a scrape that made your teeth ache. We played it for the team and watched faces change in the same way. Not fear first. Confusion. That expression humans wear when reality refuses to behave. One of the actuators, someone offered, but their voice didn't believe it. No, Maya said. Actuators repeat. This listens. Dr. Marek stood behind us, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. Keep going. We aligned fragments by matching background hum and pressure alarm patterns. It was like reassembling a torn letter that had been soaked in seawater and dried wrong. The words didn't want to sit together. They curled away from each other. When we finally got a continuous 37 seconds of audio that didn't collapse into static, the room went quiet in anticipation that felt almost childish, like we were about to hear a ghost speak. The clip began with breathing, close to the mic, fast and controlled, the way divers breathe when they're forcing calm. A voice followed, male, mid-30s, a steadiness trained into it. Capsule 7 to surface. Do you copy? We have. Static flared, swallowed the sentence, then released it in pieces. Pressure, not matching, internal. Another voice cut in, sharper, female, with a clipped cadence of someone reading instruments aloud to keep panic from blooming. Gauge is wrong. It's wrong. It's not tracking the external curve. A third voice, younger, swore softly. There was a metallic clatter as if someone had knocked a tool against the bulkhead. Then over them an alarm began to sound, not the flat, familiar beep of a warning system, but a rising tone that worked mid-note, as if the speaker itself was being pinched. In the middle of it, someone laughed once. Not humor, not hysteria. Something stranger, like disbelief, had short-circuited into a sound. And then, very quietly, a voice we hadn't heard yet spoke close to the microphone, as if the person had leaned in on purpose. It's on the glass. The next sound was not an alarm, not a scream. A slow, wet squeal like something dragging across the outside of the capsule. We froze the waveform and zoomed in. The frequency band was wrong for metal on metal, wrong for rock, wrong for any known biological call we could name without lying. Maya's cursor hovered over the time stamp. Her hand shook once, a small betrayal. Dr. Marek exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. Play the next segment. We did. The clip opened on frantic movement, voices overlapping, the capsule's interior acoustics turning every word into a ricochet. Flood doors sealed. No, listen. Surface respond. Then a new sound entered the track. It started as a faint clicking like fingernails on plastic. It came in pulses that didn't match the earlier knocking. It moved around the stereo field in a way that suggested motion, circling, testing, choosing. Someone whispered, barely audible. The filter dragged the words up out of the noise like a hand pulling something from mud. It found the tether. Pause. A breath. It's coming up. The last second of the segment contained a single loud impact, one that made our monitors crackle. The waveform spiked so high it flattened into a hard block, as if the system had been struck. Then silence. Not static. Not interference. Silence so complete it sounded intentional. On the screen, the recovered directory flickered. For a moment, just one frame of video resolved from the corrupted stream. A blurred interior shot, lights dim, a curved window filmed from the side. And pressed against that window, barely distinguishable but unmistakably present, was a shape that could not have been a reflection. Not a face, not a fish. Something broad and dark and close enough that the glass seemed to bow inward around it. The frame collapsed back into pixel snow. In the lab, no one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because saying anything would have admitted that we had just watched the abyss reach out and touch a human-made room. Dr. Marek finally broke the silence, her voice low, as if the walls might carry it. Run the reconstruction again, she said, and this time, isolate whatever sound it makes when it moves. Because that was the spike lodged in all of us now, impossible to ignore. Whatever breached the deep-sea elevator hadn't arrived like an accident. It had arrived like it had been waiting. The next 12 hours turned into a kind of vigil. People rotated in and out of the lab, but the room itself never slept. The data core sat in its mount like a black heart, and every time the system accessed it, the temperature sensors recorded a slight drop, only a fraction of a degree, small enough to dismiss if it didn't happen every single time. We began cataloging the audio the way you catalog a crime scene. Not by what you hope it means, but by what it cannot stop being. Human voices, alarm tones, mechanical strain. And under all of it, that other layer, patterned, deliberate, intimate, like something whispering through the hall. Maya built a second filter, one designed not to remove noise but to profile it. She mapped repeating pulses into a visual grid. The knocking became a barcode of intent, clusters that appeared more often when the crew spoke, less often when the capsule went quiet. It was as if whatever made the sound was responding to the presence of attention. We isolated the crew's voices and began assigning them names for mission records. Captain Dorian Vale, mission lead. Calm in the way seasoned pilots are calm. Not fearless, just practiced at keeping fear behind the eyes. Dr. Lala Sato, biochemist, precise and sharp, the kind of mind that clings to data even as the world tilts. Elias Brenner, systems engineer, prone to sarcasm until sarcasm fails him. And Anika Rowe, comms specialist, whose job was to translate the deep into something the surface could understand. The earliest clean segment we recovered came from the beginning of the descent, when the ocean above them was still a distant idea and the capsule was just a traveling room humming down a cable. Captain Vale's voice was relaxed. Descent rate steady. How's your board, Elias? Green across, Brenner replied. Except the coffee heater, which is frankly criminal. A small laugh. Anika, we later decided, then the soft click of a mic toggled. Surface link stable. Telemetry is clean. Dr. Sato's tone was already focused. I'm seeing faint fluorescent spikes in the particulate sensor. Could be bioluminescent debris. Vale's reply came after a beat. Debris doesn't spike in rhythm, does it? No, Sato admitted. It doesn't. That was the first hairline crack. Not fear, but curiosity sharpened into something uneasy. The trench makes scientists hungry for patterns. It also punishes the ones who recognize patterns too late. As the capsule moved deeper, the mechanical ambience changed. The elevator's interior had a constant low hum, power distribution, life support, stabilization gyros. But beneath that, the hydrophones began to catch the trench's own voice. A low, rolling pressure sound that reminded me of wind through trees, if trees grew in total darkness. Then came the first anomaly. Anika's voice suddenly clipped. Surface, we have intermittent signal distortion. Not a full dropout. More like modulation. There was a reply from the surface, faint and fragmented. Copy, adjust. Brenner muttered, that's not normal interference. That's like someone stepping on the line. Vale's voice stayed measured. No one stepping on anything. It's water and cable. Sato cut in softly, almost to herself. Water steps on everything down here. The clip continued, and in the background, so faint we missed it the first dozen times, 3 taps sounded against the hull. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Then, as if in reply, Brenner's wrench clinked against the console. The taps came again. Tap, tap, tap. We stared at each other in the lab, the way people do when they realize they've been hearing something for a while and only now understand it might be listening. We built a timeline of the descent using the least corrupted telemetry and aligned it with the audio. The tapping began shortly after the capsule passed the region where sunlight becomes memory. It grew more frequent the deeper they went. In one segment, Dr. Sato tried to reframe it as biology. Could be crustaceans, amphipods, something curious about vibration. Brenner scoffed. Yeah, a curious amphipod the size of a truck. Vale's response was firm. We don't speculate. We log. But speculation leaked anyway because humans fill silence with stories, and the trench offered a silence big enough to drown in. As they approached the target depth, The capsule's pressure management system began compensating in short, frequent bursts. We could hear the valves cycling. Not alarming at first, just the machine doing what it was built to do. Then an alarm chirped once, like a bird startled awake. Anika's voice sharpened. Pressure differential warning. Internal is dropping. Brenner snapped. That's impossible. Internal can't drop unless we're leaking. Vale, run diagnostics. Brenner, already running, nothing. No leak. Seals read intact. Sato, quieter now. External pressure curve isn't matching the expected. It's flattening. Vale, flattening how? Sato hesitated. Like there's less pressure than there should be. In the lab, Dr. Marek leaned forward. That can't happen, she murmured, but it sounded like prayer rather than certainty. The trench does not offer pockets of mercy. Not at that depth. Not without a reason. Another segment came through clearer, and it was the first time we heard fear properly enter a professional voice. Anika whispered, "Surface isn't answering." Vale said, "They're there. Keep trying." But when Anika keyed the mic, the only thing that returned was that wet hiss, and behind it, a faint, rising tone, almost like someone humming directly into the line. Brenner said, "Do you hear that?" Sato, "That's not our system." Vale finally, "No, it isn't." The tapping shifted. It wasn't just on the hull anymore. It moved along it, like fingers drumming across a desk, traveling from the forward port side toward the window. Then came the scrape we'd heard before, louder now, slow and deliberate. Sato breathed, "It's outside." Vale's voice dropped. "Everyone stay strapped. No one moves to the glass." And that's when Brenner broke, not with screaming, but with a sentence that landed like a dead weight. "It knows where we are," he said. "How could it?" Anika asked, voice shaking. Brenner swallowed. "Because it's on the tether. It's using the cable." The idea was absurd, and that's why it was terrifying. Absurdity is the first mask of the impossible. We got another visual fragment at this point, just 2 seconds. Pixelated interior, shaky camera, the capsule lights flickering. The edge of the window visible, the darkness beyond it thick as ink. And in that darkness, a line of faint points, like distant stars, appeared and vanished, appearing again closer, forming a curve that suggested something alive was turning. Bioluminescence, the rational brain whispered. But the pattern wasn't random. It looked like the slow opening and closing of an eye. Back in the audio, Vale spoke like someone trying to anchor reality with procedure. Initiate ascent. Manual override. Brenner, manual override engaged. A deep groan echoed through the capsule. Metal under stress, cable tension shifting. The elevator should have begun climbing. Instead, the groan deepened into a sustained strain, as if the capsule were trying to rise and something heavier than it had any right to be was holding it down. Anika's voice cracked. "We're not moving." "Vale, we are. He stopped. You could hear him looking at the instruments. "We're moving the wrong way." Sato's words came out in a rush. "We're descending. We're descending faster." Brenner swore, breathless. "That's not possible unless the tether winch had failed. Unless ballast had shifted. Unless 1,000 mundane failures had stacked like dominoes." But the instruments didn't show failure. They showed command compliance. The system believed it was ascending. The capsule was lying to itself. Then came a sound that made every hair on my arms rise. A long vibration traveling up the tether, resonating through the hull like a plucked string. There wasn't a snap. There wasn't a break. There was a message. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Scrape. Brenner whispered, "It's signaling." Vale snapped, "Stop anthropomorphizing it." But his voice didn't carry conviction anymore, and in the next breath he betrayed himself with the quietest, most human question. Why would anything down here need a language? The audio surged with overlapping alarms, structural stress, tether tension, navigation drift. In the confusion, we caught a single phrase from Anika, spoken not into the mic but to herself. It wants in. We boosted the gain and heard, faintly, another voice layered under hers, so faint it could have been artifact. So faint that if it hadn't repeated, we might have dismissed it. A whisper that matched her cadence. It wants in, it echoed. Maya paused the playback. Her face had gone pale in a way fluorescent lights cannot explain. That didn't come from any crew channel, she said. That's in the noise bed. Dr. Murek's voice was hoarse. Play it again. We did, and there it was again. Anika's phrase and the same phrase beneath it, half a second delayed, like the trench itself practicing human speech. And then the spike moment arrived, sharp enough to cut through procedure and disbelief. Brenner shouted, "The tether! Look at the tether camera." We didn't have the live tether camera feed, only corrupted fragments from the capsule's internal logs. But the system, as if responding to his panic across time, served up a new cluster of data. Maya ran the reconstruction model and a few frames resolved. A narrow exterior view. The tether line, illuminated by a weak utility light, twisting into darkness. Something thick moved along it, upward, not swimming but climbing, compressing and releasing in slow, efficient contractions. The shape was too broken by corruption to identify, but one detail cut through. Wherever it touched the cable's fibers went slack, as if the tension that should have held the capsule was being drained away. In the audio, Captain Vale's voice went very quiet. "Cut the tether," he said. Anika inhaled sharply. "If we cut, we die slower if we don't," Vale replied. And just before the segment collapsed into static, we heard one last sound, close, intimate, unmistakably inside the capsule. A soft click, like a latch being tested from the other side of a door. The first reconstructed images weren't images so much as suggestions. Blocks of gray and black, a smear of light where a console should be, the ghost outline of a person moving through compression artifacts. Our visual team called it pixel weather because it looked like a storm of broken data. But storms have direction, and so did this. The more we fed the fragments into the reconstruction model, the more the same shapes emerged again and again. The curve of the window, the bright rectangle of the comms panel, the narrow corridor leading to the service airlock. The capsule was small, claustrophobic by design. Every wall close enough to touch. That closeness mattered. It meant there was nowhere to put fear except inside your own chest. The first clear face we saw belonged to Dr. Lala Sato. The model sharpened her features from a blur into something painfully human. Hair pulled back tight, mouth slightly open as if she'd forgotten to breathe, eyes fixed not on the instruments but on the dark beyond the glass. Her lips moved. We didn't have clean audio for that exact frame, but we didn't need it. We could read the words. No. Another frame resolved. Captain Vale strapped into his seat, one hand braced on the console, the other hovering over a guarded switch panel. His jaw was clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. The lights above him flickered, dimmed, then flared as if the power system couldn't decide what era it belonged to. Elias Brenner was half out of his harness, floating in micro-movements as the capsule shifted. His hands were on a maintenance panel, fingers shaking as he tried to override something that refused to be overridden. Anika Rowe was in the comms alcove, headset on, eyes squeezed shut. Her mouth formed words into the mic like she could force the surface to hear by sheer will. We stitched these moments into order, and a coherent sequence began to form. Not smooth, not complete, but enough to feel like we were peeking through torn curtains. The tether cut discussion wasn't theoretical. Vale's hand went to the guarded switch. Brenner lunged, grabbing his wrist. "You cut it, we're a free-fall coffin," Brenner barked. "And if we don't, it brings us wherever it wants," Vale shot back. Sato, voice trembling but firm, said, "The pressure curve is still wrong. It's like we're inside something. Like the water is being held back." Vale stared at her. "Held back by what?" Sato swallowed. "I don't know. But it means it can touch us without the trench crushing it." That line, once we understood it, changed the entire story. The abyss wasn't just outside the capsule. The abyss was being rearranged. Another visual fragment showed the window in profile. The darkness beyond it wasn't uniform anymore. It pulsed faintly, as if something enormous shifted just out of view. The utility light caught a sheen on the glass. Condensation or something that looked like it. Then the shape pressed close again. Not a face, not a mouth. A surface, smooth, broad, and moving in slow waves like muscle under skin. Along its edge, faint points of light opened and closed. Not blinking like eyes, not flashing like fish lures. More like pores dilating. In the lab, Maya paused the frame and zoomed. The model tried to interpret the pattern and failed, smearing it into guesses. But the original pixels, crude as they were, held a truth the algorithm couldn't sanitize. The points weren't on the creature. They were in the water between it and the glass. Tiny drifting lights, drawn toward the window like iron filings toward a magnet. Vale's voice returned in the audio, clearer now, as if the capsule's mic had decided to confess. "Anika, can you get anything?" Anika's reply sounded wrong, too flat, too calm. "I can hear them." Vale snapped. "Hear who?" Anika blinked slowly. "The surface. They're calling us." Brenner spun toward her. "That's impossible. We have no uplink." Anika smiled, small and private, and the sight of it was worse than panic. "I can hear my brother," she said. "He's telling me to open the service hatch. He says we'll float up together." Sato's face hardened. "Anika, that's not your brother." Anika's smile widened a fraction. "How do you know?" "Because the trench, we realized, was not only pushing on metal. It was pushing on memory." The next reconstructed clip showed Vale unstrapping, moving toward Anika with careful steps, hands raised as if approaching a cornered animal. "Look at me," he said gently. "Listen to my voice." Anika's gaze tracked him, but her eyes weren't focusing right. She looked through him toward something behind him. The window. In the background, the tapping resumed, no longer patient. Faster now. Impatient. Tap, 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 tap. Brenner's voice came harsh. "It's learning. It's matching our rhythm." Sato whispered, "Or it's making us match it." The capsule lurched. The camera angle shifted, showing the corridor that led to the service airlock. The airlock door, normally just a secured hatch for external sampling tools, was vibrating as if something on the other side was brushing it. Not striking, brushing, testing. Vale turned, eyes narrowing. "Brenner, status on the hull sensors?" Brenner's fingers flew over the panel. They're going dead. One by one. Like they're being covered. The lights flickered again, longer this time. For a second, the capsule fell into near darkness. Only instrument LEDs remained, floating green and red in the black like insect eyes. In that dim, the window showed something impossible. A faint outline of the tether line outside, and along it shapes, plural, moving upward. Not one climber. Several. Smaller, faster, weaving around the cable like threads. Then the power returned and the shapes were gone. Sato's voice broke. "There's more than one." Vale's response was immediate. "Everyone back in harness. Now." They obeyed because fear finally found a command it could follow. The next sequence was where the visual reconstruction became truly disturbing, not because it showed gore or explicit violence, but because it showed intent. A frame resolved of the service airlock control panel. The indicator light that should have been steady was blinking in an unfamiliar pattern. Not a fault code. Not a known diagnostic cycle. A pattern that echoed the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. In the audio, Brenner whispered, "That's not us. That's not our system." Vale said, "Kill power to the airlock controls." Brenner hesitated. "If we kill power and it's already cycling." Vale slammed the emergency cutoff. The blinking stopped. For 3 seconds, there was only the capsules breathing. The shallow inhale of 4 people trying not to imagine doors opening where doors should never open. Then the blinking resumed. Not from the panel this time. From the seam of the airlock itself. A thin line of light appeared along the door's edge, brightening and dimming in pulses, as if something on the other side were shining a lamp through the crack. But there was no lamp outside. Only water. Only crushing dark. Sato's voice was barely audible. "It's making its own light." And then came the moment that made my stomach turn even before we fully understood it. A new audio layer surfaced. One we hadn't heard because it sat beneath the alarms and voices like a secret. It sounded like someone speaking through water, syllables stretched and softened. At first it was nonsense. Then the algorithm caught a familiar cadence. Anika's voice, but not Anika's words. It was speaking as her. "Open," it said in her tone. "Open. Open." Anika's head snapped toward the airlock. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she wasn't sobbing. She looked relieved, like she'd finally been given permission to stop resisting. Vale shouted, "Anika, don't." Brenner lunged from his harness, grabbing her shoulder. No." The capsule shook again harder. A deep, resonant vibration rolled through the floor, and the camera feed smeared as if the entire structure had been struck by something enormous. The window flashed white for a single frame, overexposed by a surge of light outside. In that frame we saw it more clearly than we ever wanted to. A vast form pressed close, filling the view. Not a single creature shaped like a whale or squid, but something layered. Folds, ridges, and long filament-like extensions that radiated outward. The filaments wrapped around the tether line like fingers around a rope. And embedded in the folds were shapes that looked like human faces. Only they weren't faces, not really. They were impressions like masks pressed into soft material. Features suggested by shadow. Eye hollows, nose ridges, mouth slightly open. The frame vanished, replaced by static, but the afterimage remained behind my eyes like a stain. Sato screamed. Not a word. Just raw sound. Vale's voice went cold. "That's not biology," he said, and for the first time, the captain sounded like a man who had accepted death and was deciding what kind. Brenner shouted, "It's in the tether housing." Maya scrubbed forward through the corrupted video and found another fragment, an exterior maintenance cam angle, shaky and incomplete. The tether housing assembly, bolted to the capsule's underside, was visible for a moment. Something moved inside the cable conduit, pushing against the transparent inspection port. A pale, rope-thick filament sliding upward, pressed so close the material flattened against the viewing window. Then it stopped, as if it had sensed the camera. And in the audio, softly, almost tenderly, the trench repeated in Anika's voice. "Open." That was where Spike lodged itself, sharp and unforgettable. The breach wasn't coming from the outside hull first. It was coming through the lifeline they trusted most. There's a particular kind of panic that happens when procedure collapses. Not the loud, flailing kind people imagine. It's quieter, more efficient. The mind begins selecting priorities like a machine: seal, breathe, survive, while another part of you watches with detached horror, thinking this is really happening. This is the moment that will be replayed. The deep-sea elevator log became that kind of panic. Clicked commands, interrupted sentences, breath that sounded like sandpaper in the throat. Captain Vale's hands were steady as he keyed emergency protocols. Bulkhead seals. Compartment lockdown. Elias, isolate the tether housing. Brenner replied through gritted teeth. Trying. The controls are lagging. It's like the system is busy. Sato snapped. Busy with what? Brenner didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was smaller. Busy doing something else with our power. The lights dipped again, longer this time. The capsule's backup illumination flickered on in a sickly amber, casting everyone's face in funeral tones. In that light, the window looked less like glass and more like an eye itself, curved, watching, waiting. Anika's breathing was loud in the mic. She was still strapped in, but her hands were on her harness buckles, fingers working at them. Vale moved toward her again, carefully, like approaching a bomb that might choose to become a person. Anika, he said, stay with me. Tell me your call sign. Her eyes darted. I can hear my mother, she whispered. She's down the hall. She's crying. There is no hall, Sato said sharply. There is no one else. Anika flinched as if struck. Then she smiled again, gentle, affectionate. You're wrong, she said. There are so many. The tapping returned, but it wasn't on metal now. It sounded damp, like something striking from the inside of a wall filled with water. Brenner swore. That's inside the tether conduit. It's in the housing. Vale's voice rose. Cut power to the tether motor. Now. Brenner laughed once, brittle. We did. Twice. A new alarm tone began, different from the earlier warnings. It was the structural integrity alert, the one no one wants to hear because it means the capsule is no longer a room. It's becoming wreckage. Sato's voice cracked. Microfractures. We're getting microfractures. Vale's response was immediate. Seal the sampling bay. Reinforce internal braces. Sato hesitated. Captain. Do it. The log gave us a sequence of visual fragments from the corridor. Brenner, moving fast, bracing himself against handholds as the capsule shuddered. His face was slick with sweat, eyes wide. He reached the tether housing access panel and yanked it open. The camera didn't show what he saw directly, only his reaction. His mouth opened. His pupils dilated. His hands froze in the air as if he touched something hot. In the audio he whispered, "Oh no." Then louder to Vale, There's nothing in here." Vale snapped, "What do you mean, nothing?" Brenner's voice trembled. "I mean the conduit is empty. The filament isn't in the housing." Pause. It's in the walls." The next shudder was violent. The camera smeared, then recovered just enough to show the ceiling panel flexing inward, as if pressure from outside were suddenly pressing from within. A seam opened along the edge of a light fixture, and a thin line of water appeared, just a thread at first, then beads. Sato cried out, "Ingress!" Vale shouted, patch it now." Brenner lunged, slapping emergency sealant over the seam. The foam expanded, white and frantic, clinging to metal. For a second it held. Then the foam bulged. Something pushed against it from behind. Not water pressure. Not a leak. A shape. The foam split with a soft tearing sound that felt obscene in a room meant to be airtight. A thin filament, pale, translucent, rope-thick, slid through the opening like a tongue tasting air. It twitched once as if sensing temperature. Then it withdrew. Brenner stumbled backward, eyes huge. "It's mapping us," he choked. Anika began to giggle. A quiet, breathy sound that didn't fit. "It's so curious," she whispered. "It wants to know where the doors are." Vale moved to the emergency locker, pulling out a flare gun, ridiculous against an abyssal entity, but humans reach for tools the way drowning people reach for air. He aimed it at the ceiling seam. Sato grabbed his arm. "You fire that in here, you'll blind us." Vale's voice was raw. "We're already blind." He fired. The flare screamed into the ceiling panel, exploding in harsh red light. For 2 seconds, the entire capsule was bathed in crimson, shadows hard and sharp. And in that light, we saw the truth the Reconstruction model could barely hold. The ceiling wasn't just metal anymore. It was webbed with faint, branching lines, like veins. Like something had spread through the structure itself, occupying spaces too small for bodies and too intimate for comfort. The filament returned, not alone. 2 more followed, slipping through seams, curling gently, almost delicately, around fixtures and wires. They weren't tearing through the capsule like an animal. They were entering it like a hand slipping into a glove. Sato sobbed, "It's inside." Vale shouted, "Anika, comms, send the log. Push everything you can to the surface." Anika's hands moved, but not the way they should have. She keyed the mic, and the audio revealed something chilling. She wasn't sending telemetry. She was whispering into the uplink like it was a confessional. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's been alone." Vale grabbed her headset, ripping it away. "Stop." Anika's eyes snapped to him, and for the first time her voice sounded like 2 voices layered. "It hears you," she said. "It hears your thoughts." The capsule shook again, a deep lurch that threw Brenner into the wall. The structural alarm screamed. A new sound joined it, the unmistakable pop of a pressure seal failing somewhere deeper in the capsule. Sato gasped. "Lower compartment breach." Vale's decision came fast, brutal. "Seal the lower compartment." Brenner stared at him. "There are systems down there." "There's water down there," Vale snapped. "Move." The log captured the moment they sealed it. A heavy lever thrown, a door clanging shut, then the muffled roar as water filled the space beyond. The capsule's air grew colder. The humidity spiked. Their breathing grew louder, harsher. And still the filaments kept coming. One brushed Vale's sleeve. He jerked away, but not fast enough to avoid contact. The filament didn't grip. It didn't lash. It simply touched. In the audio, Vale sucked in a breath and went very still. He began, then stopped. Sato's voice trembled. "Captain? What is it?" Vale spoke slowly, as if repeating words someone else was placing in his mouth. "It knows my name." Brenner shouted, "Don't listen to it." Vale's eyes lifted toward the window, unfocused. It's saying the trench isn't deep," he murmured. "It's saying we're the shallow ones." Sato sobbed. Asha was right. This was a mistake. At the mention of the mission director's name, the audio did something we'd never heard before. The static shaped itself into a syllable. Asha. Not from any crew member. Not from any known channel. The capsule's own noise floor spoke the name like it had practiced. Maya slammed the pause button so hard it hurt her finger. The lab was silent except for the soft whine of cooling fans. Dr. Marek's face had gone gray. Hearing her own first name spoken from the abyss was the moment the recording stopped being history and became something else. She forced herself to nod. "Continue." We did, and the last sequence came in broken bursts, visual fragments of the crew's faces contorted, the filaments thickening, the air shimmering as if pressure itself had been rewritten. The window went dark, then bright, then dark again. The capsule groaned as if being bent. Brenner screamed. The sound cut off abruptly, like someone had closed a hand over his mouth. Sato's voice rose into a prayer she didn't believe in. No, no, no. Vale shouted one final command, not to his crew but to the machine. Dump the core. Eject the data core. There was a metallic clunk, a violent jolt, and then, in the final, clearest frame we recovered, we saw the inside of the capsule tilted at an unnatural angle. The filaments hung in the air like pale roots. Anika's face was turned toward the camera, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent, joyful breath. Behind her, on the window, a broad dark surface pressed close. And in the center of that darkness, a small patch of light formed, like an opening. Not an eye, a door. The log ended with a sound like something enormous settling into place. Not an explosion, not a crash. A quiet, final fit like a lid closing. After the last frame, there was no satisfying resolution, no heroic final message, no clean timestamp of death. The file didn't end like a story. It ended like a mouth shutting. We sat with that absence for a long time, hoping the emptiness would mean we'd missed something. Hoping there was more data hidden, a deeper folder, a corrupted chunk that might contain a mundane explanation. But the core was what it was, a witness that had survived and a crew that had not. The official investigation did what investigations always do. It circled the event with careful language. Undiscovered megafauna was suggested, then quietly abandoned when the physics refused to cooperate. Geological phenomena were proposed, gas eruptions, methane plumes, localized pressure anomalies, until the recorded patterns of response made those theories feel like people trying to explain a handprint on glass as weather. A classified panel considered sabotage because humans would rather blame other humans than admit the ocean can make choices. That theory died when they matched the tapping pattern to the airlock light pulses and found that the sequence began before any system malfunction. It began like an arrival. Deep-sea protocols changed overnight. New tether requirements. New remote-only rules. More redundancy, more safeguards. More ways to pretend that precautions can negotiate with something that doesn't recognize our rules. They mothballed the remaining elevator capsules and stored them in a coastal facility built like a bunker. The recovered core was sealed in a Faraday cage and placed under constant monitoring, not because anyone believed it could transmit, but because no one trusted it not to. We told ourselves the horror was contained in the log. Then the core pinged. Not a network ping. Not a packet transmitted over a line. A physical ping, an acoustic pulse that registered on the monitoring hydrophone they kept in its containment tank, a precaution so ridiculous it had been installed mostly to appease anxious engineers. The first time it happened, the night technician assumed it was a sensor glitch. The second time he logged it. The third time he called Dr. Marek at home, voice thin with the kind of fear that has no theater left. "It's making the sound," he said. "The same tapping pattern." We pulled up the monitoring recordings and overlaid them with the capsule log. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Perfect match. Maya stared at the waveform. "That's not possible," she said, but the words sounded old. Like something she'd said too many times lately. Dr. Marek didn't blink. "Play it again." We did. Same pattern. Same timing. Same scrape at the end, faint but present. Then, beneath it, something else surfaced on the hydrophone, so low we felt it more than heard it. A hum. The same wet, intimate frequency that had lived beneath the trench static like a second heartbeat. We tried to explain it away. Resonance in the containment tank. Vibration from nearby machinery. The building settling. Anything that could be blamed on cement and steel instead of miles-deep darkness. But the hum didn't behave like a mechanical resonance. It changed when we spoke near the cage. It grew slightly stronger when someone leaned close to the core as if proximity fed it. In the days that followed, odd things began happening in the facility, small enough that each one could be dismissed alone, but together they formed the outline of a hand on your shoulder. A technician swore he heard his name spoken from inside the cage when no one else was in the room. A security guard quit after watching condensation form on the outside of the Faraday cage in the shape of branching lines, like veins, then vanish when he blinked. One morning, Maya came into the lab looking hollow-eyed and said, without preamble, "I dreamed the tether line was in my apartment." Dr. Marek asked, "What do you mean?" Maya stared at the floor. "I opened my closet and it was there, hanging." "What?" "And I could hear something climbing it." We tried rotating staff, shorter shifts, mandatory rest, counseling. But you can't counsel someone out of a fear that keeps proving it can touch the world. The worst part was how the core behaved during playback. Every time we accessed the files now, the corruption pattern shifted slightly, as if the data was not static, not dead, but reacting to being observed. The reconstruction models began producing frames we hadn't seen before, frames that didn't align with any known time stamp. In one of those frames, the capsule window wasn't showing the trench. It was showing a room. A sterile room lit by fluorescent panels. Our lab. We dismissed it as the model hallucinating, the way AI sometimes invents detail to fill gaps. Maya reran the reconstruction using a different model, with strict constraints to prevent artifact creation. The frame returned anyway. Same angle, same lighting. Same suggestion of our own consoles reflected in curved glass, except it wasn't a reflection. The perspective was wrong. It was looking in. When we enhanced the frame, we saw a shape near the edge of the window, a pale filament curled like a question mark hovering just beyond the glass. Dr. Marek's voice went tight. "That's impossible." No one argued. Arguing felt like tempting it. The official response was swift. Restrict access, increase containment, classify the entire recovery as a hazardous psychological event. We weren't allowed to make copies of the files anymore. Only supervised playback in a controlled environment. No personal devices. No external drives. They treated the data like a pathogen. But pathogens don't tap back. On the 7th night after the core pinged, the facility lost power for 13 seconds. Not enough to damage systems, not enough to explain much. The backup generator kicked in immediately, and the lights returned with a shiver. In those 13 seconds, the acoustic monitor recorded something it had never recorded before. A sound from inside the cage, not tapping. A latch. The same soft click we'd heard, like a door being tested from the other side. When the lights came back, the Faraday cage was still sealed. The locks were intact. The tamper sensors showed no breach. But the core's casing was wet. Not with condensation from the tank. With thin streaks of seawater, impossibly salty and dark, trickling from the seams as if the ocean had remembered it and come to collect. Maya backed away, whispering, "It's not contained. It's connected." Connected to what? The trench? The tether? The capsule? Or the minds that had listened too long? Dr. Marek stared at the core, and her face held the same expression we'd seen on Captain Vale in the final log. The look of someone hearing something that isn't sound. Her lips parted. For a heartbeat, I thought she was about to speak into the cage the way Anika had spoken into the uplink, softly, reverently, like greeting something lonely. Instead, she forced her mouth shut and stepped back as if resisting gravity. "Shut it down," she said. "No more playback." The order should have ended it. It should have been the line we drew, the boundary we defended. But boundaries are only real if both sides agree. As the team moved to power down the system, the hydrophone registered one last pattern. Slow, deliberate, unmistakably close. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. And then, faintly, as if spoken through a long column of water, A single word formed in the noise bed. Not a name this time. Not a mimicry. A simple invitation. Open. And that's the legacy the deep-sea elevator left behind. Not proof of a creature, not evidence of an accident, but the sickening sense that the trench doesn't only hold secrets. Sometimes it sends them back.